This is a spoiler alert if you haven't seen The Empire Strikes Door, and most of YouTube hasn't seen The Empire Strikes Door. This video is going to take a deep dive, head first, into the door that was the results of my quest to find the Stormtrooper that bumped his head in the original film. 3 men claimed responsibility, and eventually, with the help of a jury, we whittled it down to 1, the chosen one. I won't say the name in case you haven't seen The Empire Strikes Door and you're still here, because you should go and watch The Empire Strikes Door. Honestly, it's an okay way of spending 40 minutes. Now, this video is going to give you an insight into the decision making of the jury members that you didn't get to hear from in the film. So in the film, you hear from Greg Grunberg, Kevin Smith, Ahmed Best, Chris Jericho, and his Fozzy bandmate, Rich Ward. Now, that was my jury to begin with, but the result they gave me wasn't conclusive, and I needed a conclusive result. That was the point of having a jury. So I decided to expand the jury, and it did give me a conclusive result. And also, it was a nice way of bringing in people who have really supported my channel over the years, and also just people that I really respect and admire, and Ken Knapsack as well. But in the final film, I couldn't go into the details of everybody's decision, because I would have had to have got, I don't know, Peter Jackson in to direct it. And The Empire Strikes Door was arguably already something a bit longer, a lot longer than it needed to be. I will link to all of them in the video description to their relevant platforms if you want to go and learn a bit more about what they do, if you haven't heard of them already. But I think you probably have heard of a lot of them already, because a lot of them will have sent you here in the first place, I reckon. Let's start with the Laurie Good voters. So Laurie got Rich Ward's vote from the video jurors, and also from Amy Yamato. Now, Amy's channel, if you don't know it, it's kind of hard to explain actually, like she says herself, but it's great, so go and check that out. She went for Laurie, and this is some of what she said, read by me. Martin claims the reason was his giant head. A flawed argument, because all the Stormtrooper helmets were the exact same size, which is true. So there would be no extra disadvantage against all the other Stormtroopers. Furthermore, a larger than average head would have the helmet tighter on his face, bringing his eyes closer to the helmet's lenses, widening his field of view and making him less likely to bang his head. Which is interesting. She went with Laurie and added that he played a removal man, and removal men are known to bang into doorways. I think she did more research than me for this. I didn't know that about Laurie. Okay, also voting for Laurie, Victoria of Victoria's Cantina. She's got a YouTube channel and a podcast series on that channel as well, and she covers a lot of Star Wars toy releases, Jurassic Park or World, all good stuff over her way. And her reasons for Laurie were as follows. Her words, read by me. While it is concerning that he did not pass the polygraph test, I know they are not 100% reliable, which I do agree with. And there is enough information to conclude that he was indeed in the film as a Stormtrooper. Absolutely true. Laurie was the only one of the 3 actually who had evidence, that real solid evidence that he worked on the film. His diary notes, paychecks. Also, he had pictures of him in the Stormtrooper outfit on set. Carrie Fisher there, Darth Vader there, with his helmet off as well. And his 4th and final vote came from Ian Harrington. Ian Harrington does a podcast called The Geeky Gentleman. Actually, they reviewed this channel a while ago, and he said, for me, it's that lie detectors are very unreliable, nerves have been known to throw them, so him failing the test actually sounds more legit to me. That, coupled with his documented appearances on set, is what swayed me. So it's interesting that 2 people threw out the lie detector result, which Laurie did fail. He failed a test, and as I say in the film, it wasn't something I was sold on entirely, which is why the investigation continued. That is not the climax of my quest for the truth, if you like. And Laurie was certainly nervous. Okay, Michael Leader, who came in 2nd place, so Laurie came in 3rd. He had Chris Jericho and Kevin Smith from the video jurors, and he also had Jennifer LANDA, who you might know from the Force Center podcast. We've got 2 of her co-hosts also in the jury, which we'll come on to soon. But she made a point that I think is really important. She said, science has shown that memories are surprisingly inaccurate and can change over time. So I imagine all men believe their story to be true. She went with Michael Leader in the end, but it's a really good point. I don't think I say this enough or clearly enough. I don't believe any of them were lying or are lying. I think they all did bump their heads, and therefore they believe they bumped their heads because they did bump their heads, but only one of them did it in that scene, in that take, in that moment. Also voting for Michael was Ryan Connolly of Film Riot, who if you make content, if you're a filmmaker, you must have seen some of their tutorials, amazing stuff online. Actually, the Death Star effect that you see when I'm on the milk float, I made that myself, get me, on After Effects using one of their tutorials. So if I can do it, anyone can do it. Ryan voted for Michael and said, 1, he's dead, respect for dead. 2, he's the only one that didn't want the limelight, which is true because he refused to talk to me. 3, the press says so. The press did credit him with being the man behind the blooper when he passed away. And 4, his last name is Leader. So, I mean, that's the clincher right there, isn't it? It was for Ryan. Chris PIRILLO, I struggle with surnames. I struggle with words, to be honest, but hopefully that was a good rendition. Locker Gnome, YouTuber, all-round entertainer, he went for Michael Leader, and he said if only because he didn't want to talk about it. Who would want to be known as that Stormtrooper after all? So the fact that Michael refused to talk to me could be seen as suspicious to some, but for others actually it was a reason that went in his favour, because he just perhaps didn't want the notoriety. Although then there was that video on YouTube where he does, the only content I had of him, where he does say outright, I was the one responsible for cinema's most famous blooper. Lucas COLMENARES, Revolution Dude, he actually backed me on Indiegogo and earned his place on the jury, so thank you again, Lucas. Lucas said despite the fact that he refused to talk to you, he seems credible in his statements. Specifically the fact he was known to be a stormtrooper by the crew and was definitely in the film anyway. So again, the only statement we have is that YouTube video of Michael, but yeah, all the crew members recognised his name. He was a bit of an extras legend, it turns out, in the UK in terms of TV and film. So yeah, he definitely worked on the film, we know that. Martin KEELER, he of FANTHA Tracks, Star Wars news, interviews, all sorts really from the team over at FANTHA Tracks. The fact he hung up on Jamie says that he felt he had nothing to prove. That's the actions of a trooper who knows the truth and doesn't feel the need to justify it to anyone. So a fair few people did actually use the fact that Michael refused to talk to me to go in his favour. Finally, Star Wars Theory, an up-and-coming YouTuber, he voted for Michael Leader. He said his embarrassment gives him away. He's the only one who denies it, plus the medium confirms it. Yeah, first of all, I mean, he doesn't deny it in that video, but you could say that he released that video and then kind of backed off from the subsequent intrusion on his life. I imagine he had the paparazzi outside his door. You know, he couldn't even go and buy a pint of milk, which we all know he does enjoy, without being hounded by the press. So yeah, he probably made that claim and then started to back off from it because he didn't want the notoriety. And the medium, as you might remember, there's a neat little clip of it. I did go to a medium who did confirm, or Michael confirmed from the grave, that it was him. And finally for Michael was musician TODD KERNS, who has been in a number of bands on the Canadian rock scene, the global rock scene, and he's also basically Slash's bass player at the moment, which is pretty cool, I guess. So Michael finished with 9 votes. On to Martin Reed, who took victory with 12 votes from the jury, and he got the nod from me. And in terms of the video jurors, he had Ahmed Best and Greg Grunberg supporting him. He also had Ken Knapsack. He also of Force Center podcast fame, amongst a lot of other stuff as well. He said all 3 have compelling stories, but the evidence is key. Like Henry Fonda in 12 Angry Men, I conducted some of my own research instead of doing work I needed to get done. The late Michael Leader, though smart in his decision to hang up on Jamie Stangroom, who hasn't done that, only seems to talk in general terms about being in Star Wars. Talking about Martin now, the laughter and second take he talks about are remembered by key crew members and Gary Kurtz. He also doesn't do many conventions, which speaks to me of a lack of desire to prove something. Martin Reed knows who he is, the stormtrooper that bumped his head. So yeah, 2 things there. Martin said after he bumped his head, they did another take, which Gary Kurtz did confirm. Laurie said there wasn't a take after his bump. Of course, we don't know anything about Michael Leader's claim. And also laughter as well. Laurie sort of says we just got on with it and no one really noticed it or remarked upon it, but Martin Reed says there was some laughter from the crew, which was backed up by one of the second ADs that I spoke to, who then spoke to a clapper loader as well, and the clapper loader also remembered a laugh. So that's what Ken refers to there. Dominic Jones from Star Wars Underworld website and podcast as well. Big supporters of my channel and I love their work too. He said it's worth remembering that to them, back in the day, it was just another job and they may well have just moved on and never been interested in the fan scene. So he likes the fact, like Ken mentioned as well, that Martin doesn't do many conventions. He has literally done a handful. On the other hand, Laurie is a bit of a regular on the convention scene. So also he's probably referring to the fact that Martin couldn't provide any payslips or diary notes like Laurie did quite willingly. And yeah, like Dom said, this was probably just another job for them back in the day. So why would you have kept the random payslips, paychecks, pay stubs, whatever you want to call them? Jermaine Lucier of IO9 Gizmodo, he voted for Martin and says the polygraph plays huge for me. So for some people it was a big deal, this polygraph result. He went on to say he believes he is telling the truth. Plus his story corroborating with the producers and camera team is very significant. The lack of physical evidence doesn't bother me because who really has evidence of a job they were on 40 years ago? So again, Alex from Star Wars Explained, he says, my gut tells me Martin Reed. His story being backed up by multiple other sources who remember the same details makes his argument stronger. The polygraph helps as well, but I can see Laurie's failure just being down to nerves. Of course, he's also backed up by a fellow Stormtrooper that's just one witness versus Martin's two. So yeah, I'm leaning towards Martin. That's Star Wars Explained, explaining the situation pretty well there. Far better than me. And he is referring to Laurie having a witness. So that was Chris Bunn, who says he was the Stormtrooper leading the pack in that scene. He says he remembers it was Laurie, but he also said he remembers thinking it was somebody else before he remembered that he remembered thinking it was Laurie or something like that. And Martin's witnesses would be the second AD, Terry Madden, and the clapper loader I think was called Jimmy Harcourt, if I remember correctly. Joseph Scrimshaw, he also of Force Center, so the trilogy is complete in terms of the Force Center podcast hosts. He said, voting for Martin, I feel strongly that all three of these human beings cracked their head on a door while wearing a Stormtrooper helmet. I put on a helmet myself and tried to clear a door and the results were both painful and conclusive. While I question Mr. Reed's big head claim, in brackets, this is not a question of whose head got stuck in a jar, I find his memory of being laughed at potent and relatable. Don't we all? In the end, like all things in Star Wars, this is a question of duality, light and dark, order and chaos, large head or vengeful bowels. I side with the light. I believe Mr. Reed and his large head. So just in case you're watching this, you're still watching this, having not seen The Empire Strikes Door, why? The vengeful bowels is a reference to the fact that Laurie had diarrhea, and that was his reason for bumping his head. He was shuffling along, he was uncomfortable, he wasn't concentrating, boom. And Martin Reed did point to the fact that he does have a large head, contributing to the fact he bumped it. Charlie Ashby from the Imperial Senate podcast, the polygraph helped for him. While there aren't any physical diary entries of checks, I think it's realistic to have thrown these away after 40 years. What really cemented this for me though was Gary Kurtz's confirmation of more than one take. I think we found our clumsy trooper and he sells fish fingers. That's right, Martin Reed of Captain Birdseye fame. Darth Elvis. Hot dang. There is only one possible answer to this question and it's Martin Reed, who doesn't trust the word of Captain Birdseye himself. Ivy Tenebrae, who's a cosplayer. Captain Birdseye wouldn't lie. She gave me bullet points. That was bullet point 1. Bullet point 2. Lie detectors are something even Jeremy Kyle stands behind 100%. That bullet point is probably a bit out of date now. Bullet point 3, lack of paychecks is easily done. He isn't on the convention scene much and clearly isn't in this for the money or fame. And finally, he went to school with Anthony Daniels, who's a fine figure of a droid. There is no way he would associate with lies and deception. I know Anthony, and that's probably fair to say. Ben Gazey of the brand new podcast Jedi Order, a Star Wars podcast, he says, my choice is suspect B, Mr. Martin Reed. My reasoning for this choice is because he has people backing his story of what happened on set, and he does have a very big head. Plus, I loved fish fingers when I was young. So certainly the European members of the jury are enjoying the fact that Martin Reed was once upon a time mascot of the mighty fish finger, Captain Birdseye. And finally, Alan from Generation Tech. I think it's Martin Reed. I've got a big head too, and I've banged it on plenty of things, especially when wearing a helmet. And if I remember correctly, all the helmets were one size, yes. So if the eye holes aren't in the right place, that would be a problem. But diarrhea is also a good excuse for not paying attention to where you are going. So if you're still here, they are the reasons behind the jury members that you didn't hear from in the final film. So I hope that gives you a little bit more insight into the decision making. Martin Reed did, we can't say sweep the board, but he had quite a convincing win with 12 votes to Michael Leader's 9. And I have just released a few other videos, including unseen clips from The Empire Strikes Door and a bit more of a behind the scenes sort of video showing some extra footage and also talking about the process and, to be honest, trying to explain why on earth I did this thing in the first place. So if this hasn't put you off, then feel free to go and check those out as well. In fact, The Empire Strikes Door now has a dedicated playlist on this channel. Who knew? Destined for a playlist on my mediocre channel. Thank you for watching.